Well, happy Thursday and welcome to this week's edition of Offit Kurman's Remote Rundown. I'm Jim Reese, Director of Business Development at Offit Kurman, and each week I'm joined with labor and employment attorneys Russell Berger, Sarah Sawyer, and Veronica Yu for a conversation about the latest and most relevant employment issues related to COVID-19 and advice for owners and employers on how to best deal with these issues. There have been plenty of developments since last week. So Veronica, why don't you kick off today's discussion?
Sure. So as most of you probably know, yesterday there was another press release by Governor Hogan. And over the next couple of weeks, starting tomorrow at 5, there's going to be a lot of more businesses being allowed to reopen subject to county restriction. But the opening of more of these businesses means the inevitable increase in human interaction and potential risk of exposure. So some employers have been wondering, is there an obligation to test for COVID-19? And you may have seen in the news, big companies and industries have been vocal about their intentions or plans to implement testing. And those are companies like Amazon, Vegas casinos, and MLB. So what can testing include? I think in the broadest sense, the symptom checklist that you give employees when they get back to work could be a form of testing non-invasively. And then you have the temperature checks, and then the more invasive testing, such as viral and antibody testing. So the big issues are really coming up around the viral and antibody testing. But the fact is that there's little state or federal guidance on the issue. So to venture into that may open up more liability issues than you may have thought at first when you were thinking about it. There's also a lack of availability or a supply and demand issue that may be created by the reopening. There's going to be more need for testing. So you might have difficulty if you implement a policy where there's regular testing, then eventually you may not be able to get your hands on those tests and enforce your own policies. There's also the concern about the reliability of the testing. Viral testing is only going to test for that time period when the test is specifically taken. So that's kind of a limited capacity. And then antibody testing might tell you if you've had a form of COVID-19, but we just don't know enough about immunity as to whether those are really accurate. So it could create a false sense of security. So I think overall you have to do what makes most sense for your business and make sure whatever policy you do implement is consistent and equally applied to all of your employees.
Yeah, so another interesting, safety measure that's, is adapting and things as businesses reopen are face coverings. So now that a lot of personal services, businesses, gyms, dining, these types of establishments are starting to open, there seems to be leading towards some reducing the requirements of face coverings, allowing businesses to require face coverings, but not necessarily always requiring them for all businesses or all industries or all services that are being performed. And so certain personal services, it's going to be very difficult for someone to wear a face mask while they're getting the service. So that's something that, businesses are really going to be starting to look at moving forward. So I know I've got a couple clients that are also in the gym industry or physical fitness, and just talking about really the practical realities of as these types of services and businesses start to reopen, what kind of safety precautions are going to be actually that they're going to actually be able to implement and still run their businesses. But on the flip side of that, a lot of these businesses are the most high-touch businesses you could think of. So someone getting a beard trim, I mean, that's really, or a lip wax we described on the other side for women. But, it's just that's really a very intimate type of service. And, gyms, there's a lot of potential to spread germs there. So it'll be interesting to see how when those types of businesses start to open, what kind of actual policies and procedures they're able to put in place, what kind of loosening we see on requirements in future executive orders and how people are going to adapt to keep people safe.
Yeah, so which kind of leads me to the point I want to make today, which is this is probably a good time to revisit the CDC guidelines as to what you should be doing for your facility and operationally, because frankly, some of those things require you to purchase certain things that you're going to need in the workplace. So it might be additional tissues. It's almost certainly going to be hand sanitizer, whatever industry you're in. It's going to be posters to remind people to wash their hands frequently. Or if you have a certain, one door is your entry point, the other door is your exit point, you need signage to indicate that so people know where they're supposed to go, what the flow is supposed to be. And it's just simple. I know we talked a few weeks ago about getting rid of the communal pretzel jar, but there's lots of other things that people commonly touch in the workplace. The copy machine, the fax machine, certain door handles or doorknobs. Those are all potential areas where germs may be transferred. And I know the CDC has kind of evolved its position or its understanding on transfer through, touching objects. But still, I mean, we don't want to take any chances. And those are things that should be cleaned on a regular basis and probably more frequently than you otherwise would. I mean, I don't know that anyone came into our office and wiped down the keypad on the copy machine ever, if not frequently. But now that's something that should be done with a lot more regularity. And then, of course, if there is an outbreak, if there is an issue, if there is someone who's sick or who might be sick or who's come into close contact with someone who's been sick, I think it's imperative to do additional cleaning and to take more advanced measures to ensure that if there are any germs in the office, you've gotten rid of them so you can maintain your ongoing operations.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because there's an expense obviously associated with all of these things that we're discussing. And so I know that at least here in Baltimore where I live, there's some businesses that I frequent that have been posting on social media that they don't plan to open anytime soon, even if they're permitted to do so, just because the restrictions that they would be under or the cost of the supplies or different, aspects would be just too much for them to really reopen at this point, and they're waiting things out. So it'll be interesting to see who's able to open and who's not, and the choices that employers make.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a restaurant, you've got to print out however many menus every single day to distribute, and now but you're operating at some reduced capacity. But unlike before when you were carry out only, now you do have wait staff, you do have other people, you have bus boys potentially coming back. It's just a hard thing financially for businesses to manage.
Okay, well, this seems like a good time to pause. I'd like each of you to leave us with one key takeaway from this afternoon. Russell, we'll start with you. Key takeaway. Buy
hand sanitizer.
That seems way too obvious. Veronica, got anything better than that?
I'll try. The bar is high, but I would focus on the established best practices that we've seen develop over the last few months, instead of trying to be too creative right away as we dip our toe into the pool of reopening.
Sarah.
All right, and so I would say really pay attention to industry-specific guidance, depending on what industry you're in. If it's a restaurant, or if you're a barber shop, or if you're a construction company, whatever it may be, that it's really what you are doing moving forward is going to is going to vary more and more. So really pay attention to industry-specific guidance, both in the executive orders that are coming out, but also just within any industry, like groups you might be a part of, or with other colleagues, things like that. So pay attention to what everyone's doing.
I love the dip our toe into the pool of reopening. You guys are really smart, much smarter than me. I assume that's a metaphor, not a cliche. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Seems like you're not sure, but okay.
Sometimes I don't know what's coming out of my mouth, Jim.
No, I like it. I like it. All right. Well, we're up to the trivia question. We're going to start with Sarah. We've been quarantined for 3+ months. And I'm sure each one of you have been engaged in a nice book or some kind of otherwise reading, maybe magazines. So Sarah, we'll start with you. What have you been reading the last 3 months?
I'm reading a good book called Talking to Strangers. Malcolm Gladwell, I believe, is the name of it. It's actually on a bunch of reading lists now, given recent events, but I started reading it before, so I got it free from the library, and before there was a long line. So talking about how when we're assessing strangers and credibility and truth and the things we get wrong, and it's very common. There's more to it, but it's really good. I recommend.
Sounds good. Veronica, what have you been reading besides the Book of Metaphors?
So the short answer is pretty much nothing. I do a lot of reading during the day. So since after law school, it's been a thing where I just try not to read too much after work hours. Gotta protect the eyes,
Yeah, agree. I hear you. And Russell?
Yeah, I'm with Veronica on this one. I would enjoy a good book, but I'm kind of at the stage where, when my work day is over, when I start relaxing on the couch, I'm like 20 minutes before I'm passed out. So, but the closest thing to a book that I've read over the last 3 months is I did read the CARES Act from start to finish. That's like slightly more exciting than reading the dictionary from start to finish. So, I have done my fair share of reading.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your collective input today, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.